Shalom, everyone, and today we're studying Parashat VaYehi, the last parasha of the book of Bereshit, Exodus. You can find it in Genesis chapter 47, verse 28. ויחי יעקב בארץ מצרים 17 שנה. ויחי יעקב, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. Okay, so the first word is Vayehi, and he lived, and Jacob lived, and that's the name of the parasha, Vayehi Yaakov. And there are many discussions about this, but this is the key verse, as usual, for the whole parasha. Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. Why do we need this number? Like we can live a nice life without knowing it was 17 years. However, the number 17 in Gematria, in numerical value, is Tov, good. And that means that Jacob had very good years in Egypt. However, we have to remember in the context that Jacob is coming to Egypt with his family, 70 people, and they are now a little tribe in Egypt, while Jacob is the head of the tribe. Joseph is kind of the head of the tribe from the point of view of the Egyptians. And this parasha, although I think it's the shortest parasha in Bereshit, but it has a whole volume in the Zohar just to interpret it, because it is one of the most beautiful poetry that you can have in the whole Bible. And let us see what does that mean to us. It's very, very relevant to us today, and I'll explain why. Remember, on one hand, we are talking over here about amazing years. Jacob, his children, all of them are around him. They are happy. They are safe. They are one of the top leading families in Egypt, since Joseph is in the highest position under Pharaoh. So we have here kind of a very, very safe, tranquil, happy time of the history of the whole family of Abraham. So on one hand, we are talking about the most beautiful days. Everything is really looking good. 17, Gematria, numerical value, good. However, we know that this period came after so many troubles, especially the selling of Joseph being a slave, Jacob being in such a depression because of Joseph's loss, all of that. And now 17 years, and we all know, as we're reading it, it's a nice period of time. However, this is very elusive. It is not in Israel. It is not in their home. It is in Egypt. One of the worst places energetically that you can imagine, because Egypt was considered to be, as we're going to read later on, is considered to be the opposite. Like if the opposite to Israel, if Israel is the Holy Land, which means the highest level of spiritual positive frequencies on the whole planet, Egypt is considered to be the unholy land, the lowest of them all in the lowest energies. Yes, when we were raised with the idea of Egypt and the pharaohs and all the pyramids and all the magic in Egypt, everything is about magic, but it's dark magic. You have to remind you guys, it's dark magic. The morals, the values, and basically that led later on to slavery. We are talking about Yes, these are very nice years, but these years are leading into the worst slavery when the Israelites were reminded daily they are slaves, they are in exile, they're not home, and they're not in control over their own freedom and destiny. So we are talking about a parasha that on one hand, it is like the vision is a beautiful, beautiful sunny day. The birds are chirping and the water are running in the spring and the fruits are on the trees. Everything looks so amazing. But there is a dark cloud in the west waiting, starting to rise. The cloud of the dark slavery of the exile in Egypt. So, what's in it for us? We have to understand something very important. Then we'll start and see it, how the Zohar deals with it. So, when the Zohar is telling us about the meaning behind Vayehi Yaakov, Beretz Mitzrayim, and he lived, which means on a superficial level, he really lived finally, first time in his life, instead of being either running away from his brother or trying to survive under his uncle and father-in-law, or in the presence of his brother again, all of that, with all of these threats, finally, no threats anymore. So finally, he lived. But there's a deeper meaning to it. The Zohar says, ויחי יעקב בארץ מצרים 17 שנה, אמר רבי יוסי, לי בחמה בנבואה במצרים, דיון בגוי בחמה גלבן, עד האחה ועד עידנה דקץ משיחה. Translation, Rabbi Yossi is saying, Jacob's heart saw prophecy in Egypt that his son, his children are going to go into few exiles, not just one, which means he saw already all the exiles that will be till the end of time, till the time of the Mashiach. Verse 2, ולא מטה דנבואה דויחי אלא במצרים, והיא נבואתה מעלייתה. לית נביאו דחבתה, ולה מטה להו שום איניש, מבני נביאה, אלא הוא משה. ומשה כתיב, כי לא יראני אדם בחי, ביעקב כתיב, ויחי יעקב, ויחי נבואתה דנחתה מספקליה דנהרה. Okay, so, and Jacob reached that prophecy of Vayehi only in Egypt. And this is a very high level prophecy that the only one who reached that same level was Moses. Neither of all the prophets in the Bible reached that level of prophecy that Jacob reached in this parasha, which means the whole parasha is prophecy in the highest level, and we're going to see what does it mean to us. Why is it, says, asking the Zohar? Because in Moses it says, Ki lo yirani adam v'chai. This is from sorry, I can't find it right now. This is in the book of Exodus. The exact words in English. Okay, the book of Exodus, chapter 33, verse 20, in which, after the scene of the golden calf, Moses is trying to get annulment, atonement, and that in chapter 33, verse 20, God says to Moses, ויאמר לא תוכל לראות את פניי, and he says, you cannot see my face, כי לא יראני אדם וחי. because a human being cannot see me and stay alive. The word is vachai. Okay, and now when we are talking about Jacob, it says VaYehi. Okay, here VaYehi, the shoresh, this root of the word is again chai. Life, live, but it's much higher than that. The Zohar is explaining to us because that word vachai or chai, VaYehi, means a prophecy coming from the shining mirror, which means when we are talking about different levels of spiritual growth of a human being, we know that most people start with the level that is called nefesh. There's no word for it in English, but that's the level of the soul of every living creature and most people. Nefesh is I am. It means I exist, which means all the drives that we have to achieve sustenance, security, family, community, you can find those drives among the whole animal kingdom. Nothing different. Even soulmates, you have birds getting married for life. You have fish getting married. You have, which means they're, say, a couple raising kids, having territorial connections, having maybe communities. All of that stuff you can find among animals. The ability to create tools and to have a language, communication about everything that needs to be communicated in order to achieve survival. All of that you can find in the animal kingdom. That's nefesh. Human beings, most human beings, they have basically only nefesh. What does it mean? I exist, I survive, I sustain myself and my family and my community, and I leave behind me another generation that will continue the legacy and basically the DNA. That's nefesh. So when people are very, very materialistic and they can't have any kind of willpower to drive them beyond the physical needs, this is the level that is called nefesh. Above nefesh, there is ruach, translated somehow into spirit. Okay, ruach is when a person has a very strong urge for spirituality, for spiritual experience, for spiritual connection, something that is outside the box, something that is with connecting not to pleasure that belongs to the five senses, but something that is outside this world. That's ruach. Very few people have it nowadays. I think that we know very few of them because in our society, it's very, very materialistic society. So ruach, when somebody is intensifying very much his spiritual drive, connection, intensity, and desires, then you can go to the next level, which is neshama. So if you know the sefirot or the olamot, nefesh corresponds to malchut, sfirat malchut, ruach to sfirat zeranpin. Malchut is also olam asiyah, the world of action. Ruach is olam yetzirah, the world of formation, sfirat zeranpin, and above it, neshama, soul, and the soul connects to olam bria, sfirat bina. The highest level people can arrive in our day and age is neshama. That's very rare because you need very strong intensity of spiritual growth and commitment to reach there. However, There is even a level higher than that, and it's called chaya. Chaya comes from the word chai, life, alive, the power of life, the force of life. Okay, that force is coming from chaya, sfirat chokhmah, olam atzilut. Only Jacob and Moses reach that level, and therefore it says about Moses, Lo irani Adam v'chai, and here Vayehi Yaakov, that both of them reached that level that is called chaya. This level is so high, the frequency is so so beyond just a spiritual level, but it's also the level, the highest level of prophecy that humanity knew from its beginning. So what's special about it? That the prophecy over here is a very, very clear high level of prophecy that, as the Zohar is calling it, mar'ah ha'meira, shining, illuminating mirror. While this can be translated into our language, like you looking at a screen of a TV or a movie screen or computer screen, which means you look in, and you see the future, you see what's beyond and above clearly, like you're watching right now this screen. That's called the nevuah shel chaya, the prophecy of the level of chaya. Now, the other prophets, and there were many other prophets, there were, I think, 22 at least other prophets, they prophesied from a much lower level, and that level that they prophesied from was they could see only shadows, which means they could see shadows, and from the shadows they extrapolated to all kinds of prophecies, which means the relativity between the prophecy of Moses and Jacob relatively to the prophecies of the other prophets. It's like watching the future happening on a screen in front of you, shining colors, 3D, and it's all very clear, or seeing all kinds of shadows and extrapolating to what these shadows really mean. Okay, however, something that is very important, and that's what's important for us, וכן ביעקב לא נאמר ויחי אלא במצרים. Both Moses and Jacob arrived to that unimaginable, illogical level of prophecy that our brains cannot even get close to understand that level of prophecy. However, that happened to both in Egypt. Jacob goes down to Egypt for that, and Moses reaches that huge level in Egypt, standing in front of Pharaoh. Why Egypt? וזה אמרו לו, מטה לנבואה די ויחי לה במצרים. He did not reach that level of Vayehi, that prophecy, only in Egypt. כי להיותו מקבל הנבואה מטבור למעלה מזר אנפין, שנאמר וראית את אחוריי פניי לא יראו. Just to make it shorter, verse 4, על כן הגיע ויחי יעקב במצרים, so that verse, and Jacob lived in Egypt, which means reached that level of prophecy of chaya, chokhmah, olam atzilut, only in Egypt, and he was not happy, ולא היה שמח, כי בארץ ההיא קשרם של העמים, כלומר שכל זוהמת העמים כלולה שם. Egypt is like the drain of all the filth of all the different nations. However, וגם הספירים של כיסא הכבוד, שהם סוד הניצוצים של החוכמה השבויים ביניהם, שמכונים ספירים, והוא בסוד הכתוב, ממעל הרקיע של רלושו כמראה אבן ספיר. Okay, so in the prophecy of Ezekiel, chapter 1, it says that above the heavens, be above the heads of the angels, there is something shining that looks like a shining sapphire. This shining sapphire is the light of the level of Chokhmah. This is a very, very high, intense illumination of bliss, wisdom, everything that is good, and power, the energy of life. So, yes, says the Zohar, all the filth and the darkness and the dirt of all the idol worshiping of all the nations was drained into Egypt. However, with it were drained also all the supreme sapphires, which means the holiest, highest sparks of holiness, that when all of the dirt is drained into Egypt, that was coming in through that drain. And therefore, the Israelites, therefore Jacob with his family had to go down to Egypt, although in the previous Parashat VaYehi, God says to Jacob, you go down to that land, I'll be with you, don't be afraid. I will also raise you, bring you out of this terrible place I'm sending you. Which means, why were the Israelites, why did they need to go to an exile in such dark place? The place is the dark magic, idol worshiping, which means really worshiping all that is negative, all that is in the deepest layers of negativity. And the answer is because the great sapphires that illuminate the light of Chokhmah, VaYehi, were kept in the dirt of Egypt. וגם הספירים של כיסא הכבוד, and even the sapphires of the throne, okay, also that dirt of the sapphires of the throne were captured in that dark place. ולא הגיע אליהם לבררם שום איש, and there was nobody who could sort them out of the darkness and bring them back into the light and redeem them. So we understand that because of the sin of Adam, that all the sparks of holiness fell into the darkness. Now the purpose of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants was to correct the sin of Adam, and part of it is going down to Egypt to sort through the dirt all those holy sapphires from the throne of the Creator. No one could reach that. And therefore, Jacob and his sons had to go to Egypt to lift up all of these holy sparks, shining as the sapphires of the throne, to bring them over out for redemption. And he says, Ki eretz Mitzrayim miklipa kasha. The land of Egypt is a very, very strong klipa. Klipa means dark negative energy, but you have to remember, you cannot have dark negative energy unless there's a big, powerful, positive light that dark energy is basically leeching on, living on. Okay, so And that dark shell, dark קליפה, שזוהמת כל עמים קשורים בה, that the dirt and the filth of all the nations are attached to it. משום זה לא היה שם בשמחה. Therefore, Jacob could not be happy in Egypt. But it says 17 years, good. אבל גם ספירים דרך קורסי עיקרי שמה, שהם סוד הכלים הניצוצים של מדרגת החוכמה שנפלו שם. Okay, so which means that only when Moses and later Jacob and later on Moses came to such deep, dark filth of negativity, only there they could find such an intense illumination. And that means that whenever we need to do our correction, which means to find those lost sparks of Adam and Eve and lift them up, we need to go into a dark realm, negativity, unbelievable, illogical cruelty and craziness, so we can sift through that darkness and finally redeem from there those lost sparks that fell over there since the sin of Adam. So therefore, we can find in our history like golden eras and then dark eras, and then golden eras and dark eras. And whoever can realize that, humanity right now, I'm not saying the whole of humanity, but that part of humanity that is mostly Europe and North America, maybe Australia and some other parts, that during the last 70, 80 years, we're talking about since World War II, the world in these areas was kind of logical, normal, and it was okay. It was okay. That was after sifting through the filth and the dirt of all nations. And whoever remembers World War I and World War II were very, very, very deep ravines of darkness, cruelty, suffering, and misery in the large scale. And that's why they're called the World War, both of them. That we can say most of the world was involved in these two wars that basically reached so low in the level of suffering in humanity and so on of the fighting sides and especially the dark side. So while coming out of that horrible era, especially from the beginning of the 21st century till 1945, it looked like that we sifted through a lot of sparks, and the result is, Kabbalistically, that we had those most maybe quiet, prosperous era in days in the history of humanity. Yeah, we had golden ages in different countries, different civilizations in the past, but if you realize it was always golden and peaceful for the elites, but most people, the big majority, were still in poverty and abuse. Here we had an era that was the closest to, good days. And these days have come to their end. If you notice or not, you have to open your eyes. These days are finished. The way the world looks like right now, this is falling apart. Why? You have to look at it from a large scale point of view. And a large scale is the scale of evolution, which means humanity evolves generation after generation, event after event, war after war, explosion after explosion. However, we are always better after every huge crisis. Why? Because the crisis forces humanity, as the sages are teaching us, the crisis forces humanity to go and sift through the rubble, the dirt, the all of the negativity, and reach into some great findings. And when we find them and embrace them, we reach to a higher place that basically says a new era has begun. And we realize that, humanity goes through these kind of cycles between horrible wars and atrocities and then periods of peace and bliss. However, the bliss did not touch the masses. It was always just for the lucky elites. The last 80 years, it touched almost everybody, which means reaching a place in which poverty has almost disappeared. Poverty, which means not having the ability to eat. And I'm talking about, again, those parts of the world like Europe and North America and other countries that followed, that were a block of countries in which, like, we forgot how life looked like just decades ago, or just across the border by our neighbors, where there was no sifting, there was no revelation, there was kind of advancement, but it was very superficial. How do we know that the moment everything came out of balance, then the result was another wave of cruelty? And you could look at the Southeast Asia during the 70s and 80s, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. You could see, that's just an example, parts of Africa, and of course the Middle East, in which you see how the dirt, when we are talking about cruelty, abusing of people's rights for all that is good, that is dirt, which means you need a dirty mind, which means a brain and heart without commitment, without unconditional commitments to do not kill, do not steal, do not covet, whatever your friend has. No, it's like, in order to be in such a place where these atrocities run around, it's like when you see them happening. And today we're shocked when things like this happen, but they continue to happen in many parts in Africa. We simply turn our back to it. Many parts, talking about the Middle East, in so many places, the cruelty in different areas, like genocide that was done in so many parts of Africa and also in Asia. All of that was not in that scale as it's happening and coming up right now. Why? Because those days are over, same way that the days of Jacob were over, and the Israelites had to simply sink into hundreds of years of heavy, terrible slavery and torture. So, but the Zohar says another thing. Only when you are in such a place of such darkness, you have the ability to draw the highest level of light. Which means Moses and Jacob arrived at that level of prophecy like no one else in history in Egypt. In that drainage of filth of the whole planet. And therefore, the only way you can achieve great levels is on understanding the point of no pain, no gain. which means the highest you want to reach, the lowest you have to come from, which means when we go through the worst atrocities, the most horrible, illogical injustice, and we still stay faithful to the principles and the values that we are talking about of honesty and integrity, and just read what does it say on the tablets Moses got from Mount Sinai. When that commitment is so unquestionable, it's not an easy life. You have to really fight hard, but not so much, which is an angle that we have to understand. Because Amar Rabbi Shimon, verse 6 in the Zohar of Parashat VaYehi. בזמן שהיו ישראל אנשי אמת וצדיקים ועושים צדקה, לא היו מפחדים. During the time that the nation of Israel were people of truth, they were righteous and were doing charity all the time, they had no fear. When we are talking about the history of humanity, the history of humanity is full of terrible atrocities, cruelty, and you just name it. A lot of it. So how do you deal with that? And Rabbi Shimon is saying, when we individually have a brit, a commitment, a covenant with those ideas, you have nothing to be afraid of. כי בשביל המעשים טובים שעושים ישראל, because of the good deeds that the people of Israel are doing, and they were doing a lot of chesed זה עם זה, היו עושים הרבה חסד זה עם זה, על כן לא היה בהם פחד, because of that they had no fear. Why? Chesed, loving kindness, as we studied, create a shield of protection to every human being. However, when the Israelites chatu vehoglu, when they sinned and were taken into diaspora, מחמת עוונותיהם מעשה מרעים, לא יכלו לסבול מפחד, still they were not afraid. שלא יישאו באמת בגלות לעולם על עוונותיהם. They were not afraid they're going to be stuck in the exile forever. אז זה באו מידת הרחמים והדין ביחד. Which means, only when we go to the deepest frightening events of atrocities, only then when we still stick to the truth, to the faith, in the good, and we do not go right and left from it, we still stay connected to it, there's nothing to be afraid of. So let's go back again. We live in a very special era. Humanity achieved a very high level of bliss, peace, unity like never before. I'm not saying the last 80 years were perfect. Relatively to all the previous eras of humanity, this is a jewel, but the time is done. It's over. Now, in order to get the benefit of the next level, we need to go into exile. We need to go into a dark time in which the old structures of society, of thinking, of belief systems must go down because their time has expired. A new kind of humanity must reach out of the rubbles. And we are facing that period in which, on one hand, you could see on those countries that are still safe in a way, like every individual has its own safety that, it's not like in a dictatorship that somebody would like to have something you have, and because he's close to the king or to the dictator, he can get police to harass you in order to get from you whatever they want, without any. But things like this do happen in the free world also. Democracy is not functional anymore. How do we know? The people do not trust their governments, and the governments do not trust the people. The moment you lost the trust, the whole contract between the people and the government, which means what is a contract? What they say, the people are giving their powers, money, and other powers to the government, which means we are basically, to live in any kind of a country, to have a government, you need to give up some of your freedoms. You make money, you give taxes. Okay? You want to do this and this and that, but it's illegal, so you don't do it. Why? Because there's a law, the law has to be followed and obeyed. But that's on one condition, that you feel that your government is doing the same for you, which means sacrificing a lot of the personal needs and desires of the governing body or the governing people, just in order to be loyal to the people who handed over that power of freedom to them. So we know in the last few decades, people feel more and more disconnected from the government in most countries, in the free world. Why is it like this? Because the old structure has expired. It's not functioning anymore. It's just what you see right now, democratic countries, they're not democratic anymore. If you really research each one of them, there's always some rich, powerful companies behind the politicians. And basically, they are the ones who are using the politicians as puppets or like puppets on a string, in which you basically don't really know who really runs the government. And the major, most important decisions are made behind your back, not in the parliament, not in the government, not in the public space. How do you know? Because you get promised and something else happens. So how come I voted for one policy and I got another policy? And the answer is because the politicians, they don't owe you, they owe to the people who finance their campaign for elections. So that idea became very strong in the last few decades, till the place that people don't even trust the government and the bureaucracy, because you realize they serve other masters. They don't serve the public. This is the basic belief system of most people in the free world, which means that era is coming to an end. And a new era is coming in. But before that, we have to understand, no pain, no gain. If you don't go down to Egypt, you cannot sift the jewels out of it and come out as a chosen, as a leading nation of illumination to Mount Sinai revelation and bring the Torah to the world. It is like, it's not that, oh, there was a mishap, Egypt, and then there was this amazing thing that is not connected at all, Mount Sinai revelation. Oh yeah. There won't be a Mount Sinai revelation if there won't be Egypt slavery before that. So you have to understand that the process that humanity is going through, we go through ups and downs. However, if we want to compare today's ups and downs and 1,000 years ago ups and downs, we'll prefer immediately today's ups and downs. We are even when we fall, we're in a much higher place than the people 1,000 years ago. If you just hear about the Crusades and how the Crusaders massacred so many Jews and Muslims on the way to the Holy Land, and how they massacred uh, cities after cities, communities after communities, robbing, like in the most horrific way. That was 1,000 years ago. What about the Mongols, Genghis Khan? What about this? With so many. What about the raids of the Cossacks of Khmelnytsky in the Ukraine, Poland, and Lithuania in the 17th century? And the story can go on and on and all over the world. What about America? How many millions of Indians were massacred, killed, executed in different ways? The world has changed. The world is different. Much, much better on one hand. Why? Because we have to understand there is a process of evolution of humanity. It's a metaphysical process of going down into an Egypt once in a while, either for, let's say, you can take all of Europe, America, South America, Africa. It's like you can all, like the whole of humanity together, and you see those steps moving up the ladder of evolution. All of it lead to the Messianic days. Right now, we finished one period that showed that the world can reach higher levels of peace, globalism. What does it mean, globalism? World peace, communication of merchandise, moving of people freely from one country to another, all of that. Not everybody was part of it. North Korea is not part of it, but this is the exception. The exception. Okay? We go to the 70s, the Iron Curtain was much bigger. The world is moving forward, but you need to go through, once in a while, going down in order to reach high. Moses and Jacob, they reached high because they took the dark, let's say, if Egypt is like a dark hole, do you know the dark holes create a lot of light? Why? Because whatever falls into the dark hole, there is such a strong gravity. If you use that pulling force properly, you can generate so much light and so much power, and that's what Jacob and Moses did, which means when we face those times that everything is falling apart, you can't trust anymore. Not the government, not the your family, not your friends, like whatever you thought that it's going to be here forever. And history is over, finished. From now on, everything is just going to be better and better. There were a few false prophets who prophesied that in the last few years, just before the Corona. No more plagues, humanity has crossed that line. No, we still need to go to Egypt in order to experience redemption. Without the Egyptian darkness, there was no way to achieve Mount Sinai revelation. Without the destruction of the first temple, there was no way to reveal all of that revelations that came later on during the time of the second temple, that the peak is finally the Mishnah, the Zohar, the Talmud. And the Mishnah, the Zohar, and the Talmud, they are coming after the destruction of the second temple. So you see those moments of darkness, like, or let's say, go to the Spanish Inquisition, when the biggest Jewish community in the world that lived in Iberia, in Spain and Portugal, this community has been destroyed. Like most of it was either killed or forced to convert to Christianity. Very small part of it managed to escape. And what happens after that? If you're going to look, that was 1492. That's the Spanish Inquisition. And then 1497, that's when the Portugal forced all of the Jews to convert to Christianity. And that was over with the Jewish community of Iberia. That was the most powerful and the majority of the Jewish world for the almost 500 years. Okay, so with all the amazing creativity that was done over there, with so much wealth of poetry, halacha, study, philosophy, you just name it. But then after the disaster, the huge disaster that the whole thing disappeared. And when we are talking about the Holocaust was 1/3 of the Jews in the world. The Spanish Inquisition destroyed much more than a half of world Jewry. Okay? And what comes out in the 16th century? The golden era of Sfat and the great Kabbalists, Rabbi Zakloria, Rabbi Yosef Koach, Karo, Shulchan Aruch. There was the intensity of the creativity of basically Judaism recreating itself. You cannot even imagine how intense and powerful that was. So, and now we can see after the Holocaust, also the growth of the revelation of so many secrets, like just the simple thing about the first time in history, the publication of the translation of the Zohar and the commentary of all the writings of Rabbi Zakloria, and the fact that thousands and thousands of people around the world are studying that, and not to speak about the rest. It's like the creativity is in such large scales, you have to go down to sift through the dirt to find the sparkling sapphires in order to reach to the next peak. So if you're climbing a high mountain, you realize that you climb, then you reach the peak of the ridge. And then you realize there's a higher ridge. You have to go down to the valley and climb up again to the next ridge, all the way down and up and down and up, all the way till you reach the highest peak. The same is with every one of us. We all have to understand that in order to achieve great revelation of light, we need to build the vessel, and the building of the vessel is when we must face the most craziest challenges of darkness, insanity, loss of security, loss of all what we've got, and to still stay attached to truth, values, and integrity. This is the time that we build the vessel so the next wave of light that we need to reveal can be revealed, because if we don't go through all of that hardship, we cannot build the vessel that can reveal so much intensity of light. So whenever we go, like if we go back to the stories of Genesis, neither Abraham, Sarah, Isaac and Rivka, Jacob, Leah, Rachel, neither of them have a nice, easy life. They're the most righteous, greatest people ever. You have to understand. Even they had to build a vessel that will reveal an intensity that was not known before. That's how you say tikkun, which means correction. How do you create a correction? It means you correct a level of awareness and you reach out to a higher place. But if the foundations are not strong enough, and how do you create the foundations? When you fight the hardships, when you overcome the illogical problems that mentally can drive you insane. However, that's what the Zohar says. When you stick to charity, when you stick to truth, when you stick to the values that this book is giving us, when you stick to those values, you, although and in spite of all the hardships, this is your greatest time, because that is when you build the vessel. We heard the story of Joseph. Without being put by his brothers in the pit, without being there in the pit with the snakes and scorpions, without being pulled out and sold as a slave to the all of these merchants and finally to the Egyptians, and without being in the pit, the jail, after Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, he had no vessel to reveal that power of ruling Egypt. Look, when you give someone, give a little child to drive a very powerful car, it's not just exciting, it's so dangerous that it can usually come out with death. You cannot hand over power to someone who did not exercise before his or her willpower to deal with the most horrible atrocities and illogical challenges. So when we face those challenges, when we face those hardships, instead of saying, I'm not lucky, it's because of my sins, all of that stuff, you can say that. But then that's religion of the Dark Ages. Always taking responsibility, which means always saying, it's my fault, it's my sin and so on. Yes, it is. However, it's not only. If we go through this kind of hardships, yes, it is because we were wrong. But it's not a punishment. This is our way to come to a higher level in which we can look down to where we have been and to say, wow, where have I been? It's impossible. I was that person. That was my belief system. I can't believe I was there. It looks like another lifetime. It is another lifetime. If you're really in the right place, then you can experience few lifetimes in every physical lifetime, which means you're not supposed to just live and do the same thing all your life. Once in a while, if you're really on a journey of a real spiritual commitment, once in a while, you, like Abraham, like Isaac, like their wives, Jacob, and so on, you go through horrible disasters that rebuilt you, built your shape, abilities, so you can have a bigger, stronger vessel to contain a higher light. So you can say, yeah, all of that happens to me because I'm a sinner. You can say all of that is happening to me is because the way I live right now is sinful relatively to the next level. And right now, the surrounding light, which means my future revelation, future level, is pushing me to move over. And I have to get into shape through the fights, through the building of the strength, building of the certainty, getting rid of fear and all the outcomes of fear, which is hatred, anger, all of that stuff. And when we create that certainty that everything that is happening is really in our favor, so we can build a stronger vessel and then be strong enough to sift through the dirt and to get those heavyweight sapphires that will become the person that I become in my next stage. So this is what we're talking about. So Jacob is kind of in a place, it's a summary of all the hard times of the past, celebrating those hard times and the victory over those hard times, just a second before the next level of hard times come in, is coming in. He was not there anymore. He had enough. But his children. So that will be in the book of Exodus. So when Jacob arrived to such level of greatness, he gives us also the tip that even in the darkest times, you're not supposed to fall totally into the abyss of fear and negativity and so on, because the more, especially in nowadays, where it says in the Zohar very clearly that in nowadays sticking to the wisdom and the study of the Zohar will be our safety net, protection shield. So we are not going to get hurt so much as society is coming out from its, on one hand, it was the most beautiful time in history. On the other hand, the most materialistic, shallow, how should I say, most atheist eras in history of humanity. It's like we don't believe in God anymore and we can do it by our own. And no, you can't. The farther away you send God away from your public space, the depth, the farther away is the depth. And now the question is also, what kind of a deity do you follow? Because in one way, it's better to be an atheist, which is also a belief system, because an atheist is someone who doesn't believe in God. Which God? Which God you don't believe in? Oh, we'll tell you exactly. And you know what the Rabbi Ashlag is saying? The God that you don't believe in, I will spit on that God also. Because humanity is still not totally out of the dark ages. So when you say, you know, they're atheists, they're very much against God. But which God? The God their grandparents or their parents taught them about. No. Would I tell you that that God is an idol? It's fake. Because that God, that is a God of venom, punishment, anger, if I'm right, everybody, I'm going to heaven and all the rest of humanity will go to hell for eternity. There's no God like this. There's no God like this. It's an idol. Of course, being an atheist, it means I am a reaction to that God vision. There's no God like this. You're right. But why do you spend your life being against something that doesn't exist? Right? You better be always in favor of something than against something. Just try to think about it. A lot of people, they define themselves through what do they hate and what are they against. It's a very negative way to define yourself. You should define yourself what you are for and what you believe in. Because let's say there's so many things to be against, there's so many lies to be against them. When are you going to have time to find who you are and what you really want to be? And that is the era we need to come into. Meanwhile, the era we're coming out of was not the peak. It was not that great, but it's falling apart in front of our eyes. And it will take a long time and a lot of patience till we see the new era surfacing and coming out of the abyss and the confusion and the hatred and the fear and the loss of sanity that you can see around, and it's just getting worse by the day. It's not a bad thing. Again, this is to challenge us in order to usher in a much better, higher era. How do you know it's connected to our times? So Jacob over here, he says in the parasha, he's prophesying. Let's see, that's in a few stages. But the major thing is chapter 49. ויקרא יעקב אל בניו ויאמר, and Jacob calls his sons and he says, האספו ואגידה לכם את אשר יקרא אתכם באחרית הימים. Gather please, and I will tell you what will happen with you in the end of days. Which means all those amazing blessing that he's giving to his sons, which is a very high level poetry, that is still till today part of Hebrew. But before that, there's kind of introduction when he blesses the sons of Joseph. And you see it in chapter 48, verse 16, where he says, המלאך הגואל אותי מכל רע יברך את הנערים. And he says, the angel that redeems me from all evil will bless the boys. ויקרא בהם שמי ושם אבותיי, and my name and the name of my fathers will be called upon them, Abraham and Isaac, and they will multiply like fish in the land. And he adds later on, he continues verse 20, ויברכם ביום ההוא לאמור, בך יברך ישראל לאמור. And he blesses them, the children of Joseph, and he says, in the future, this is how people are going to bless, people from the nation of Israel are going to bless. ישמחה אלוהים כאפרים וכמנשה. God will put you like Ephraim, like Menashe. And this is still those blessings I just read, still in many Jewish houses around the world, on Friday night, after the Kiddush. That's how they bless their children and their grandchildren. This is how you see that 35 centuries, 36 centuries later, the prophecy is being fulfilled. Still the same language exactly. But there's another thing. And I'll finish with that. Before Jacob is starting with all the blessings, he starts with a weird expression. Verse 7, chapter 48. ואני בבואי מפדן מתה עלי רחל בארץ כנען בדרך בעוד כברת ארץ לבוא אפרתה. ויקבריה שם בדרך אפרתי בית לחם. And myself, when I came from Haran, Rachel died because of me in the land of Canaan, on the road, still on the way Ephrata, and I buried her there in the way to Ephrat, which is called Beit Lechem. Beit Lechem is mentioned over here. And in a context in which the Zohar is asking, why does Jacob have to mention that horrible event? Because for Joseph, probably it was one of the worst events in his life, because that's when Rachel, his mother, passed away. He was only 9 years old or something like this. So the Zohar is saying very important, very strengthening words. Okay, verse 84 in Zohar Sulam commentary. ושואל, and he's asking, וכי לא ידע יוסף שאמו מתה? Didn't Joseph know that his mother died? הלא היה עמה כשמתה. He was there with her when she died. למה היה צריך יעקב לספר לו את זה? Why does Jacob have to tell him that? הוא משיב, And he answers, no, this is a prophecy for the future. Ela Yomar, when it says, and Israel told Joseph, he says, this is the upper Israel. This is the upper Sephirot, the level that is called Israel, that is awakening in the time of the last redemption. And he says like this, כשנבוא מן גאולת ישראל, when the time will come for the redemption of Israel, תתעורר השכינה, the Shekhinah will wake up from its sleep along the last long exile. ותתעורר כנסת ישראל, and the gathering of Israel will wake up. ותערוך מלחמה עם העמים, will wage war with the nations. וימותו מהם מישראל, and people will die among the Israelis. במלחמה הזו, in that war. והתקרבו לאט לאט לבוא אל הארץ. And when they come to Israel, that will be a slow, painful process. It won't be, guys, get up in the morning, Mashiach is here, all the Jews will come from all the, and in no time, they will fly to Israel and the redemption will be there and Mashiach is here. No, it's going to be a long, painful, slow process. לאט, לאט, לבוא אל הארץ. To come to the land and to take over the land. And then God will tell the Shekhinah, Rachel, כשהיא בוכה, she will be crying for על בניה שמתו. The Shekhinah will be crying for her children that will be killed in the battles taking over the Holy Land. אל תפחדי, don't be afraid. שכר יש להם לבנים שמתו במלחמה על שמי. This is not just a war over the land of Israel. This is a war over the name of God. אחרים שלא מתו כבר שבו. Those who didn't die already came back. והם שמתו ישובו ויחיו בתחיית המתים, and those who died in or along the wars over the land, they will wake up in the resurrection. So what does it mean, meta alai Rachel? So you can say, Jacob said, Rachel died because of me. He takes responsibility. Says, yes, that's on the superficial level. But on the higher level, meta al yichud shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The fight over the land of Israel will be the fight over the name of God, which means what's the name of God? Fighting for honesty, integrity, values, all what the Torah stands for. קידוש השם. ועל זה נאמר בעוד כברת ארץ לבוא אפרתה. דהיינו שמתו על ייחוד שמו של הקדוש ברוך הוא. And why it's called בית לחם? Because the Hebrew word beit lechem is Hebrew, if you didn't know. Beit means the place of, lechem means bread, but it means also war. It's called after the war for the redemption. And this war will not be a war over land. It's a religious war. It's a war over glorifying, sanctifying the name of God, not the false God that people believed in during the Dark Ages. The God of hate, the God of separation, the God of us and not the God of them, the God that will punish most of the world and reward only us. No, we're talking about the one and only God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is the God that created the heaven and the earth. That is the God that created everything, every creature that is sustaining everything, that is sustaining even the ones who hate it. every second. This is the God, the name of God that is going to be glorified, the God of love, equality, patience, comfort, all of what finally humanity needs to reveal. This is what this war is about. And we are lucky to be part of that war. Thank you so much, and have a great week.